Damage through Warframe's Helminth system is pretty accessible, I'd say, and for the more complete Warframes is a super obvious route to take. However, multiple damage Helminth options present themselves, so how do we determine which ones to take or how to approach? How do we know which one best fits our situation or is overall best if we have, to pick one frame to go subsume? Maybe not worth investing in at all? Luckily, I'm here to teach you all about it. From this video, you can expect a full breakdown of the functionality and use cases of Roar, XATAS Whisper, ECLIPSE, and Nourish in the context of accessing more damage through the Helminth system. This video aims to educate you, and note while this is, gonna contain the usual video aid, the MS Paint drawings, very charming I know, this video can act as a purely auditory experience. Feel free to put me down and get back to whatever you were doing and just listen along. Thank you guys for the support on my last video. Love you guys to death. Drop your video suggestions in the comments as this is your channel. I just run it. Don't forget to like and sub for more, and let's jam. Quick little disclaimer that obviously there are more damage Helminth options than this. These are just the more broad ones that can fit into a large majority of builds. Note that other Helminth options, like perhaps Webbed Embrace, can be better for some niche situations, but I can't have this video go 3 hours unfortunately, so maybe I'll open a membership for that in the future. We're going to kind of do this in a bit of a unique order. We're going to talk about Roar, which is very simple, talk about XATAS, which is very complex, and then we'll end with ECLIPSE and Nourish, which are also very simple, just to kind of keep it a little bit fresh here. So, starting with Roar. Roar is all about dealing damage over time, effects, status, and abilities. Roar is one of the few sources of ability damage buffing in the game, which is why it so easily finds its way into the majority of caster builds. You can of course debuff enemies with something like Viral or Corrosive, but Roar is the apex of dealing ability damage, especially because most abilities that deal damage deal it through those status and DOTs, which Rhino's Roar is already the best at dealing with, helping out. Gas, Heat, Electric, Toxin, Slash. Roar also helps with Blast, but actually has some decent competition there with XATAS Whisper. We'll get there when we talk about it. Roar's percentage, especially through the Helminth system, is a lot lower than something like ECLIPSE, but with the way it multiplies, which we'll get to in a minute, in addition with the things it multiplies with that XATAS and ECLIPSE cannot, it makes it uniquely best in slot in a lot of setups, especially with the way statuses are in the game and the synergies you can get externally and so on and so forth. Roar also buffs teammates without an augment, unlike ECLIPSE. Nourish can also do this, of course. And since Roar's favorable setups are so plentiful, really no one's going to complain about having a Roar. You're basically guaranteed to get mileage out of it. It's just how much mileage you're going to get. It's very likely you're going to be helping your team out, especially if they don't already have a Roar. It's a very popular Helminth, so sometimes you will kind of get a little bit of value taken out of it. Same with Nourish, we'll talk about when we get there, but a lot of builds go for Roar, but that's just because it is so good. So let's talk about why it's so good. So now that we understand, where Roar is good, I'm going to do a pretty quick explanation and demonstration, the same way any respectable YouTube creator would, through Microsoft Paint. With abilities, it's pretty simple. Most damage buff abilities only buff weapons, but Roar can buff abilities directly as opposed to needing to debuff enemies to prime them for your abilities. That's pretty simple. With statuses though, whether from abilities or weapons, let's explain why Roar is so good with it. And it's through a mechanic called double, and we're specifically talking of course about DOTs by the way. It's specifically through a mechanic called double dipping. This is also how Bane mod's work, and XATAS Whisper also does a weird little double dip as well, but we'll talk about it when we get there. My ass is never equipping a Bane mod, that's just not happening, but this can be useful information. I know a lot of veteran players are probably going to get a little bit annoyed because they already know how double dipping works, and you can skip later in the video if you already understand it, but double dipping is essentially when a buff value is used twice in a damage calculation's output. This can be for a variety of reasons. With Roar, I think it's way easier to understand. With other things, I think it can be a little bit more complex or up to straight up spaghetti code. So I'm going to offer a different perspective, but also just, show you a picture. Let's start with the base understanding, which is a mild oversimplification because we have like status weighting, Heat's actual calculation, status chance, but the basic double dipping premise is what we're trying to cover in isolation here. So let's get to drawing. Alright, let's get to it. So let's say this is unbuffed Rhino. He fires a single, let's make some assumptions here, okay? The Bratton has full heat damage, 100% status chance. I'm not using real Warframe math here, okay? The goal is to get double dipping in isolation so we can really understand it. So unbuffed Rhino here fires a single round that deals 2 damage. The heat proc that follows will inherit half of that damage and deal it over time. So 1 damage, this leads to a conclusive 3 damage, 2 from the initial bullet, 1 from the heat DOT. Let's say that Rhino, I'm going to draw Roar kind of as best as I can here. A little square like that, and then whoop, whoop, like that. Okay. Let's say he pops Roar for 100%, meaning our damage is going to be doubled. This is a universal damage amplification. So we will now deal 4 damage with the initial heat bullet. Then the little DOT inherits that 4 for 0.5 times 0.5, which leads to 2, which would normally, you'd think, okay, that will lead to 6 damage, a doubling of damage. But that's incorrect, right? So instead, the 2 itself also gets multiplied by Roar. So this is multiplied by 2, but so is the DOT, which leads to 4. This leads to 4 plus 4 from the initial bullet, which leads to 8 damage. So from a Roar that doubled our damage, we didn't just double our damage, we almost tripled it. This is the basic premise of, as you can see, 3 versus 8. We nearly tripled our damage from a ability that you would normally think would double it on paper with the number, right? This is essentially what double dipping is, and I'm going to kind of explain an alternate perspective. Instead of imagining Roar as something tied to Rhino or his weaponry, imagine it as a debuff placed on the enemies that makes them take more damage from you. It sounds stupid, but imagine that when you pop Roar, all enemies are placed in the Roar dimension where they take double damage or increased damage by whatever %, right? That means that when you hit them with a bullet, they're going to take extra damage. When they burn, they're going to take extra damage, so on and so forth. Imagining Roar as a debuff placed onto enemies, in my opinion, makes double dipping that much easier to understand. XATAS Whisper is probably the most complicated entry on this list, but I promise it's not too hard. If you're still struggling, you can leave a comment and I'll gladly help you out. So XATAS is going to be best for precision damage, blast, synergies, utility, and some niche stuff like the Sobek Acid Shell Augment. For those who don't really understand what XATAS Whisper does, it essentially adds an additional hit of damage that is a buffed value relative to your original damage. So basically, imagine if Roar's buffed part numerically was just added as a separate hit. I don't think words really do it a lot of justice, so I've drawn this pretty picture. Roar or Eclipse or whatever, these can be interchangeable, basically just adds damage to the hit that you deal out. Assume these are both 100% buffs, by the way. Just draw that in there for you. Okay, so Roar will buff it directly, while XATAS takes the buffed amount, the difference between 100 and 200. The buffed amount is 100 here. And it will basically take that and add it as a separate hit, which has a lot of synergies, but as you can see that the conclusive damage is still 200 for both, but the way that XATAS does it is very different, and that's why people see it as so complicated. But let me, if you take anything out of this video, understand XATAS is not complicated because of what it does. XATAS is complicated because of how the game's code interprets what it does. That's very key that you understand. The game just freaks out when it sees the extra hits that XATAS can do. Initially, XATAS allows you to proc Void status with your weapons, which scales with your weapon status chance, kind of like something like Shock Trooper, Nourish, or like Fireball Frenzy Bite. And basically, that creates these little bullet attractor bubbles or projectile attractor bubbles around enemies, which is super, super good. Basically, it will allow any kind of projectile that enters that bubble to hone in on the location of the shot that procced it. So provided you land a headshot and that bullet attractor is made, that void status is procced, everything that flies into that bullet attractor will then hit the enemy's head. This can absorb your gunfire, the enemy's own gunfire, which means they can't hit you basically, they're just shooting back into themselves, and your allies' gunfire as well, which can be incredibly useful. This allows for precision synergies because you just have to land the one headshot and then the bubble will keep doing the rest of the work for you. This works with certain projectile weapons. You can make a beehive over someone's head basically of just projectiles. It's a very fun ability. The only downside to it is that if you're using a primer, like an AoE primer, you can prime a bunch of enemies with void status on accident, and then your precision weapons basically can't function in that environment. But there's another big reason why XATAS is used for precision weapons, and let's talk about it now. It's a little bit complex, but I promise you'll get it. So XATAS actually also double dips, just like Roar does, but it does it with body part multipliers. In this case, headshots will be the most often application. So say this is a Rhino without a buff. He fires a round that deals 2 damage. Say the headshot multipliers 2, which I know it isn't. Warframe nerds, leave me alone again, please. Fires 2, or it multiplies by 2. This leads to 4 damage on a headshot. This Rhino, however, has XATAS equipped. He for some reason took Roar off, right? We have 2. times 2, which equals 4. I just found that out recently. Pretty great. And then let's say our XATAS is 50%. Okay, this is key. 50% is a very attainable. You need a lot of power strength to hit a 100% XATAS, but let's say our XATAS is 50%, so we can expect a 50% damage increase from this, right? Ooh, we'll see. You're kind of wrong. Let's say, so because of the 50% XATAS, we will deal 4 damage plus an additional 2 damage as that separate hit I mentioned, which would lead to 6 damage, a 50% increase. Ooh, but it's not. The 2 actually gets checked for a headshot multiplier for reasons I cannot discern. That's what DE decided though. And in this case, because I did land a headshot, this gets turned to 4. So our damage is no longer 6, it is now 8. Our damage has doubled when it should have only gone up by 50%. That is really, really strong, and it makes XATAS a pretty nice low investment and high investment option when you're aiming for the head. And usually weapons that aim for the head are called precision weapons, but luckily, we use blast and gas and whatnot to amplify that. But XATAS also has a synergy with blast. This is as complicated as it gets. If you need to rewind, go ahead and do that. But blast XATAS is so complex that even I can't really explain it with 100% confidence. Hello, I'm about to explain XATAS Blast. It's really complicated. I'm just gonna put the wiki's entry on screen. Hopefully that helps you if I did a really bad job explaining it. Sorry, love you, bye-bye. To put it as simply as I can, basically XATAS Whisper can proc off of Blast's procs, whether it's that little hit that occurs with one blast proc or 10 that occurs on an on-death explosion, or when the stacks hit 10. These can proc XATAS and will use the blast's elemental damage to scale with. But it also works a little bit uniquely. Normally blast's damage does not scale with the heat and cold elemental mods it's composed of. Gas doesn't do this either with heat or toxin, but this, for some reason, XATAS hit will use the heat and cold elemental mod scaling values, which makes it really, really strong. This also increases AoE effectively, right? This just adds a ton of extra damage because it's damage on top of damage on top of damage, right? It's just the blast proc, the XATAS hit, and it's the initial damage, XATAS hit, blast, XATAS again. Very, very strong. Additionally, XATAS can double dip with faction bonuses or whatever. I would assume that Bane mods and a teammate's roar might also work there. But XATAS Blast is incredibly, incredibly strong. It's just a weird piece of math. But also, additionally, both Blast and XATAS kind of have similar interests. It's not just the synergy. Blast is a great way to get extra AoE damage on precision weapons, especially, if you can't use gas. Gas is really great on snipers and stuff, but the problem is if you're using an acuity setup, you lose multi-shot, which means you can't proc a lot of the status, which means you can't get the gas clouds to 10 stacks usually. Blast is better because it has a kind of a fixed radius of the explosion, and you can kind of just keep re-procking it. Obviously both are pretty good, but if you're going to use the headshot multiplier and double dipping of XATAS, and you're also going to use Blast to make your sniper kind of explode outwards, I don't know, man. It sounds like a pretty insane ordeal. But yeah, basically XATAS is able to proc off of blast procs, which just leads to a chain, a ton of chaining damage that is really, really strong. Okay, thankfully we are done talking about XATAS and Blast. I feel so much better. We're talking about ECLIPSE. ECLIPSE is great as a final damage multiplier that is conditionless, simple, and can provide some on-command damage reduction as well. ECLIPSE provides a higher upfront numerical value than Roar and XATAS, but in its broad nature, provides a lot less dimensional value. It provides a lot up front. It's very front loaded, but it provides nothing else. You're just kind of playing it straight when you use ECLIPSE. Weapons that aim to deal a lot of upfront damage, but they don't use blast. They don't use status DOTs, headshot synergies. This leads to not a lot of weapons. Exotic contagion weapons, explosive weapons like the Icarius or the Tonkor are really good options here. There's no second phase of buff damage, no double dipping. There's just not a lot going on, but it can be very strong with against like contagion, rocket launcher, stuff like that, so on and so forth. If you're trying to go for damage cap with galvanized aptitude, with a Stalta or whatever, ECLIPSE is just the least interesting option we have here, and I rarely see it used for its damage. But one thing you should be mindful of is that it's, in terms of power allowance, an ability is allowed to have, it's kept in mind that you can swap the casting to hold cast and get 75% damage reduction. That's pretty good, and I don't generally see players opting to swap around. Usually they use one or the other, but I genuinely, personally, this is an opinion, I find it kind of to be a nice option, right? Depending on maybe the challenge, the challenging level of the content you're doing, the teammates you have, if they can keep you alive, or just pure vibes. The ability to swap between the two, either based on the mission you're in, or based on the part of the mission you're in, I think is actually really cool. You can get a bunch of upfront damage or a bunch of survivability, right? I think it can actually be quite good. The problem is there's just better options across the board. You're literally doing DOTs in almost like any regard. You want roar, headshots in almost any regard, XATAS, melee, wrathful advance, or shock with shock trooper. And then once we get to nourish, it'll feel even worse, in my opinion. There's just like, Eclipse makes you kind of want to look at other options, right? If you want the DR, Null Star with Neutron Star can get pretty insane damage, really great survivability. Both are pretty low maintenance, I'd say, but you can get Arcane Hotshot off of Null Star. The heat is great for survivability. If you're like, if one of your teammates has Nourish and you get box with the Null Star, you get Viral Prime, and you just get so much value. Breach Surge, Pillage, there's just better options than Eclipse. But in the cases where Eclipse is good, Contagion, damage capping, final like multipliers, it's very good. It's just not, it's not as strong within the niches. And again, to call Roar niche just isn't really accurate. Within the options that are provided, within the specializations that Roar or XATAS operate in, it just doesn't provide the same kind of really strong conclusions. But we're going to talk about Nourish now, because Nourish is the true broad king. This Helminth option is just stupid. Now, the people who like make the whole meme about like Revenant, Nourish, Torrid are absolutely right. But this Helminth option is by far one of the like most noob proof options you get. It's absolutely beautiful. Basically, to understand what Nourish does, it just adds viral damage to your damage profile, which means you can proc it with your status effects. It kind of adds it to your weighting. It also has like this retaliation thing where if you take damage, or any, Nourish also affects all your teammates, including your companions. So if they take damage, a little burst goes out that procs viral as well. So the viral priming on this ability is insane. Adds a little bit of extra viral damage as well. Nothing like to write home about, but it's a fine additive bonus. Additionally, it adds an energy income multiplier, which means any energy you get from any sources is then multiplied. This is so good. Let's run down a list. Again, I know this video focuses on XATAS, Roar, and Eclipse because they kind of take up that Forbidden Jutsu Helminth slot, but Nourish doesn't fit in that slot. It can go on the same build, so it leads to like fairly competitive damage outside of those non-specialized, again, Roar, XATAS, Eclipse builds. If you have a build that's specialized for the Helminth, it's just gonna outclass. But if we're talking like low, medium investment, just like chill vibes, Nourish is so good. First of all, the viral. The viral obviously leads to a damage increase, but this is a debuff damage, like a debuff form of damage, which means Warframe abilities benefit from it. Well, we know what Warframe abilities also benefit from? Energy economy, which Nourish basically fixes on its own. This allows you to cast more abilities to either do more damage or keep yourself alive, both of which are massive DPS increases. Another big part that people forget about Nourish is that viral kind of sucks to mod for, because you're combining two statuses together to create something that doesn't really scale with itself. It's a little bit funky. Like if you add a lot of heat mods, you get a lot of heat damage, electricity, the case is the same. With viral, you're combining the elements, and it's also not only that, viral caps out at 10. So modding for viral actually kind of sucks. So if you use Nourish to get the viral onto your weapon to prime, you get up to one or two mod slots free to add more real damage, whether that's electricity, like a new galvanized mod, crit damage with like bladed rounds or whatever, hemorrhage or whatever. Literally the world is your modding menu. You can add whatever you want. Nourish is so, generally it is absolutely Helminth slop. I'm not going to disagree with the people who flame about it, but like what it does to the comfort and like the modding freedom, the simplicity of it is just so great. So yeah, if you're like a newer player, try to get your hands on Grendel if you can. I really strongly recommend it and feed into the Helminth, because Nourish, what it provides, viral priming, which increases your DPS through viral, right? Also increases your modding freedom, which increases your damage, right? If you know what you're doing, especially, and if you don't know what you're doing, even greater, right? It means you don't have to mod properly, which is always great. Also, you don't have to mod properly because your energy econ is going to be so ridiculous, it won't matter. And yeah, Nourish is just insane. And it provides the buff to your whole team as well, if you could want any more. So yeah, is it going to outperform hyper-specialized builds of Roar, Eclipse, and XATAS when they are built for that exact synergy? I would say no, generally definitely not. But if you don't know what you're doing and you're just a happy-go-lucky vibes-based player, and you're playing for pure vibes, no joke here, at all with a Marble Rivals tournament worth $40,000. Anyway, yeah, if that's all you're about, dude, just play the Nourish, have a good time, and all these options are really, really, really great. So I'm gonna get to the conclusion, but basically TLDR, Nourish is a really solid option, but it's just gonna get outperformed by specialized builds. So that is about gonna wrap up my lecture. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one a lot. Okay, basically the TLDR, the conclusion is if you are doing status damage, DOTs, or Warframe ability nuking or damage, you're gonna want to rely on Roar. Any kind of headshot blast synergies or weird stuff like with acid shells, things that synergize with an extra instance of damage, XATAS Whisper is probably going to be your best choice. Anything kind of that doesn't fall within those niches, Eclipse will usually take care of. It's really great, simple, conditionless. Final multipliers, Vicarious, Tonkor. You know, there's other options. You know, now that Hunter's Munition isn't meta, it's a little bit complex, and finding things that Eclipse is good on. Contagion can be a little bit tricky, and then Nourish is an overall incredible solution if your build is having any kind of problems, damage problems, energy problems, survivability problems, by extent of energy problems, so on and so forth. So while these aren't the only damage Helminth options available to you, and like there's so much cool stuff you could do with the Helminth system, hopefully this gave you a decent understanding of when to use each one and how to use them properly. If you guys have any other questions, or you feel like I didn't maybe do a perfect job explaining something, please let me know in the comments. I'll be more than happy to help you out. Love you guys so much. Stay tuned. Talk to you soon. Good night.